Hi, this is Miss Lamb, and I am back talking about spreadsheets. What else? And today we're going to move into the big leagues. We are going to be discussing pivot tables. We've done a lot of basic data analysis in the last couple of videos, but now we are ready to level it up. And the best way to start leveling it up is with pivot tables. So the first question that you might have is, what is a pivot table? A pivot table is a way to organize and summarize data that allows you to do more things than just regular formulas, at least in a much less complicated way. So before we begin building our own, let me show you what pivot tables look like, and then we're going to go step by step in creating them. What I have here on this page are two different pivot tables. I have one where I wanted to count how many trips are on each given day of the week from our data set. So how many trips were made on Sundays and how many trips were made on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays, etc. And then I wanted some information about what was the most popular station. And so I got the station ID and the station name, and I counted the number of trips that were made beginning at that station. And now we're going to be just about ready to start looking at it on your own so that you'll be able to make your own pivot tables. Now, pivot tables are a slightly more advanced and complicated skill. My hope is that by the time you finish with these next few videos, you will feel comfortable in using pivot tables in order to further analyze your data. So the first thing that we're going to do to try to create the pivot table is we are going to select our data set. You should know how to do this already. I click on the box between the A and the 1, and that will allow me to highlight my entire data set. Okay, now I go to the data option on the toolbar, and I scroll down to pivot table. Okay, now in this create pivot table box, it's asking me two things. The first thing is it wants to know my range, but it already knows my range because I highlighted my entire data set. And the next thing that it wants to know is it wants to know if I want this pivot table on a new sheet or on an existing sheet. But I want it on a new sheet, right? Normally, at least for your first pivot table, and I'll show you when we make a second pivot table how to add it to an existing sheet. But let's look at how to put one on a new sheet. I press create. This automatically jumps me to a new tab. It creates the new tab for me. And you'll notice while it's loading that this table is completely white. There are no grid lines here. You'll also notice at the bottom that mine is called pivot table 3. That's because I already created pivot tables 1 and 2. I had one, I deleted, I have one here, I deleted 2. It's not a big deal. It'll just keep counting up even if you delete them. So if you mess up a whole bunch of times, it'll keep that count. Now, I notice here on the right side, and this is where it becomes important, that I have this pivot table editor. And what I want to do right now is take you through the pivot table editor so that you really understand what each of the things are. And we'll actually wait to create our pivot table until the next video so that this one does not get too long. So the pivot table editor automatically opens up on the right. The first line here, this right here is the range, right? It's asking you over here for the range, but our range is already there. If I needed to change it, I could click on these boxes. Now, the next thing that happens is Google Sheets suggests to me, it asks me if I want to make a pivot table out of certain versions of the data. So if you see something there that's like, hey, that's something I wanted to know, then you could. For right now, I don't need any of these pieces I don't need any of these pivot tables. So I'm going to minimize the suggestions so that they don't disturb me. And this way they're not in my way. And now I'm at the 4 most important things. I can add rows, I can add columns, and then I can calculate values and I can filter my information. So rows, as we know, is what's going to populate here on this side, exactly as it's labeled here. Columns is what am I going to see across, and values, which is something we're not used to, is what's the calculation, which are always connected to formulas that I want to perform with this data. What are the calculations that I would like to perform? And